Should I go ahead and start? Oops. Good afternoon. My name is Leslie Gordon, and welcome to the U.S. Geological Survey in another installment of our monthly public lecture series. We have a terrific film and discussion on tap for you today. We have two speakers I'm happy to introduce. We'll first introduce the film, show you the film, and then our speakers will show you some additional information and answer any questions. Our first speaker who will introduce the film is Todd Eskew. Todd's a research ecologist with the USGS in our Las Vegas field office. He's had 20 years of field experience in the southwestern U.S. and Mexico. He's studied a variety of systems and organisms. And his experiences, including everything from mapping vegetation and habitat for threatened and endangered species, working from salamanders to bighorn sheep. He has degrees from Prescott College, Colorado State University, and his PhD from the University of Nevada in Reno. He's had been through a variety of federal agencies, from Fish and Wildlife to Bureau of Land Management to the National Biological Survey, and we all know what happened to them. Now he's part of us, the U.S. Geological Survey, and I said he's in our Las Vegas field station. Our second speaker tonight is Cecil Schwalbe. Cecil's a research scientist with the USGS in our Sonoran Desert field office in Tucson, Arizona. He also has a joint appointment as a faculty member at the University of Arizona there. And in his research, he's been involved with conservation of amphibians and reptiles in the southwestern U.S. and northwestern Mexico for over a decade. He has degrees from Rice University, Washington State, and his PhD from the University of Arizona. And he's got the terrific talent of being able to mimic frogs creaking and making them respond. So, Cecil and Todd will be your speakers this afternoon, and we're going to watch a film entitled Sonoran Desert, Fragile Land of Extremes. Thank you.
Well, by way of brief introduction, I just wanted to tell you how we came about having this film. Part of, as you noticed, being a government scientist, it changes what happens all the time with our positions, and administratively things change all the time, and yet the job still seems to stay fairly much the same. During one of these changes, we had a merger of all the different disciplines in the U.S. Geological Survey, and so we all got new neighbors in our office buildings. And at one point, we ran into the filmmaker, Steve Wessels, who was cohabiting the office building that I was in. And just through office discussions, he ended up finding out more about the work that we did in biology, and became intrigued by coming down to visit us when we were working in the Sonoran Desert, and resulted ultimately in this film that he put together. And so the wonderful opportunity we had to work with Steve all came about because of his enthusiasm and interest in all the different disciplines in USGS. And so I guess with that, it's time to watch the film.
Gila monsters, black-tailed rattlesnakes, battling male tortoises, and the amazing saguaro cactus. These are but a few of the uniquely adapted organisms of the Sonoran Desert. Stretching from central Arizona and southeasternmost California, the Sonoran Desert extends into Baja California and Sonora, Mexico. The incredible diversity of desert-adapted plants and animals here are the products of thousands of years of evolution in the face of desert extremes. Blistering heat, scarce rainfall, And now, adding to these extremes is a growing human presence in the region. What makes the Sonoran Desert tick? What threats are surfacing? Biologists with the Department of the Interior U.S. Geological Survey are addressing these questions. They are studying plants and animals here at the request of resource management agencies. Teamed with other scientists, they are compiling a baseline of knowledge to benefit future generations.
It's a great collaborative effort of two arms of the U.S. Geological Survey, then in concert with the other research and management entities here in the Sonoran Desert. So we're really trying to become a cohesive force in the research and understanding of this particular biotic community.
Much of the work is taking place in Saguaro National Park. The park has two locations, east and west of Tucson.
Saguaro National Park was created in the 1930s to protect these really magnificent stands of saguaro cactus and other vegetation and wildlife associated with the Sonoran Desert. So it's really the premier desert park in this part of the country. Now, our mission as an agency, as a park, is to give people an opportunity to enjoy these saguaros and wildlife and other resources out here, and also to protect them so that people can come out here, our grandkids and our great-grandkids, 100 years from now, and enjoy them the same.
Saguaro cacti are the sentinels of the Sonoran Desert. Their almost human form is both eerie and somehow comforting. One of their most interesting adaptations is their accordion-like build. The ridges or flutes that run vertically can expand or contract in response to periods of rainfall and drought.
A lot of emphasis has been placed on this plant through the years because it's so obvious, and so interesting, and it's the plant that people come to see when they come down to this part of the world.
What's different is that they conduct all their photosynthesis through the stems, and in so doing, they have a ability to lose a lot less water, whereas leaves are very porous and are breathing off water all the time. Saguaros can gather their energy by photosynthesis through the skin that has a very thick surface on it of waxes that keeps it from evaporating moisture off.
Saguaros live, on average, 175 years. The odds of a saguaro seed ever reaching maturity are something like 40 million to 1. The seeds require high humidity and warm conditions shaded from the sun. Most commonly, this occurs beneath trees like Palo Verdes, which have become known as nurse plants.
All these shrubby trees like the Palo Verde are perfect perches for birds, which may have just been up visiting the saguaros and eating some of these very nice sweet fruit. They're like a kind of a rich watermelon flavor to us, and no doubt much sought after by the birds and mammals in the area. And all the other animals use these Palo Verde trees and the other shrubs out here for cover, and then when they end up defecating while they're sitting there on the trees, they automatically place these seeds in a place that's excellent for germination.
One of the intriguing things about saguaros, and it's related to its root system, is that because of the shallowness of those roots, the saguaro gets first dibs on a lot of the rain that falls. The other plants come into action a little bit later, a day later or more, and the saguaro's already had a big gulp of that rare resource, water.
A mature saguaro, nursed under a Palo Verde, will take up much of any rainfall. Ironically, the Palo Verde is left dry and often will die at the foot of the saguaro it has literally brought to life. As recorded in these photographs, saguaro numbers have dropped dramatically in some areas. Hard winter freezes, very dry summers, cattle grazing, and cutting of nurse trees all took a toll. Saguaros at this location are now making a comeback.
A new rib has started right here, and another one here that's out of sight, probably another around there.
Studies by scientists like Ray Turner have linked the success of saguaros to climate. periods of drought show very few new plants. Rainy periods over the past century have produced vigorous new stands of saguaros.
The male-to-male combat behavior is very interesting, and we're still learning a lot about tortoises as far as how territorial they are, how strongly they maintain home ranges. The males will combat probably to defend resources, and that resource may be a female, it may be a home range, but in any case, from what we know about it, it seems like the resident male is always the winner. So even if he's a bit smaller than a larger male, if the larger male is new coming into his area, the smaller male is typically the winner.
We also have a significant research effort on the effects of these invasive grasses into the Sonoran Desert and the effects that they're having in carrying fires into that body community.
Fire has not historically been a factor in shaping desert ecosystems. Grasses brought in to improve cattle grazing and to stabilize soils are now spreading throughout the Sonoran Desert. They fill in the interspaces between larger plants, creating a fuel load, making it easy for fire to spread. Just such a fire started in 1994 at Saguaro National Park East, when a burning car rolled off the road.
We did surveys for tortoises right after the fire, within weeks of the fire occurring, and found that there was a 12% mortality of adult desert tortoises in this area. And for a long-lived species like the desert tortoise, that's considered to be a very high mortality rate for one incident. Likewise, with the saguaros, we found over the course of the last several years, we found that there was a 25% mortality rate on the saguaros in the burned area, and the background mortality in the unburned area was more like 5% over the course of 5 years.
So now, fire is a dramatic threat here. Perhaps the most hazardous invader is a perennial grass from Africa called Buffelgrass.
If it burns, the plants with which it grows have not evolved under the compulsion of fire. They don't know anything about it, and it'll kill them. So the saguaros and the palo verdes will be gone.
To convert from this wonderful Palo Verde saguaro Arizona upland desert to a savanna consisting of mesquites and acacias and over a savanna of introduced grasses. And that would greatly reduce the diversity of both the plants and animals and would change the Sonoran Desert as we know it.
It's now gotten out of the pastures and out of the areas where they were stabilizing soils and into our wildlands, like back here on the slope. The problem is that Buffelgrass carries fire really well in areas where it can get started. In areas like this, such as Javelina Picnic Ground, we have lots of people coming up in this area, and we really expect that it's only a matter of time before this gets set on fire. And when that happens, all the Palo Verde and saguaros in the slope have the potential to be lost at that time.
Once an area has burned, Buffelgrass rapidly reseeds, takes advantage of nutrients, and grows back thicker than before.
So that we have a greater risk of burning that area again, and after only a few fires, you've taken out most of the native perennial vegetation, and you're stuck with a Buffelgrass grassland.
So we're trying to learn ways to deal with this invasive grass and see if we can find ways to eliminate it where it's already gotten established and keep it from getting a foothold.
want to ensure that people 100 years from now can come out here and still have the opportunity to see a desert tortoise, which is just a magnificent animal that people don't see very often, but when they do, it's such a thrill. And so we want to do everything we can to ensure their survival in the park.
Tortoises in the neighboring Mojave Desert are now listed as threatened. To avoid this same fate in the Sonoran Desert, scientists are using a high-tech arsenal to understand, preserve, and protect the Sonoran Desert tortoise.
So we'll first go to her old location, and then I'll see if we can track her from there if she's not in that den. The Sonoran Desert, where tortoises live, they occur in rocky foothills like these behind me. And these mountains pop up throughout the landscape like little islands in a sea of desert. So the tortoises occur seemingly isolated on these islands, and to get from one place to another, they have to cross these low desert valleys, which is quite a trek for a tortoise. But occasionally they are able to do this.
How do they live? How do they sustain themselves? And how do they produce enough young to keep the population going over the long term? Or do they? Can a population in isolation from all the others actually produce enough to keep it going? Does it take a network of populations? So the first key to that is finding out how many eggs females lay, how many times a year, how many years they reproduce, and just all the information from year to year and tortoise to tortoise about how many babies they're producing.
All right, let's see where she is.
Several times each year, volunteers join the scientists to study how well the tortoises are reproducing.
All right, straight this direction.
They help collect female tortoises fitted with radio transmitters.
Each animal has one of these on, attached to it with a different frequency. So we can have a whole group of animals out here and track them all and not get them all confused, which one's which or anything like that, because they'll have the unique frequency.
Once located, the reptiles are gently transported in pillowcases to a makeshift examination tent. The scientists use ultrasound to look inside the tortoises.
Follicle that's just about to be ovulated.
They may see eggs or spherical early-stage eggs called follicles.
Spot here in the center.
If a tortoise happened to have shelled eggs, we would use X-radiography to X-ray the tortoise, and with that be able to count exactly how many eggs they had at that time.
Tracking the numbers of follicles and eggs in tortoises will clarify just how well the population is doing here.
There's a big dirt burrow. Let me check and see if she's in here. Sounds like it. And there she is. Looks good. All right, well, let's set up. One of our interests in this particular tortoise is that this tortoise made a long-distance movement, which is unusual for us to be able to document, 2 years ago. And she moved about 32 kilometers to another mountain range. So we named her Thelma. She's a middle-aged female tortoise. And so we named her after the movie Thelma and Louise, because she just decided one day to take off. In the process of doing that, she was hindered by the interstate, I-10, as well as by the railroad tracks. And she also ran into several people along the way that called us and things like that. So we actually affixed a tag to her that said, if found, please call the Saguaro National Park. And we were able to find her multiple times that way, because she would get out of range for us to even use our telemetry equipment. All right, and she's at 2340 grams.
All of the radioed tortoises, including Thelma, provide crucial information on how and where the reptiles live.
You're just going to apply some pressure there. You ready? And I'm going to pull the needle out now.
Periodic blood samples help determine the onset and spread of disease. These blood samples are also vital for identifying tortoise movements. DNA fingerprinting procedures run on the blood clarify how individual tortoises and populations of tortoises are related. The fine detail of the DNA relationship shown is a record of how tortoises have migrated between populations in the past.
Well, the questions we have about tortoises involve how often they move between populations across the landscape. But when you're dealing with such a long-lived animal, using traditional field techniques can be very difficult, because following them around, if they were to only move between a population once in their lifetime, and their lifetime is 80 years, your chance of actually discovering that can be rather difficult. So by using molecular techniques, we're able to really trace the movements of tortoises throughout history, as well as their relationships to other populations in the deserts, and be able to have an idea of how often they move around and how important that is for their maintaining their populations. Because as we start putting in freeways and housing developments and things that separate populations and create barriers for tortoises to move back and forth between them, if they're not able to do that, we want to know if that's important for them to still be able to maintain viable populations in the areas that they live.
This is the most impressive reptile we have in the Southwest, in my opinion. This is the Gila monster. This is one of only two venomous lizards in the entire world, the other one being its larger cousin, the Mexican beaded lizard. And this is a widely foraging predator that searches about for the helpless young of birds and mammals. So some of its favorite foods are like baby cottontail rabbits. They'll eat quail eggs, but they probably don't eat baby quail, because the baby quail, 10 minutes after they're hatched, they're able to run around too fast for a Gila monster to catch them. Notice this round tail. This one is just only about a half as big a diameter as it can get, and these are fat storage organs. A Gila monster makes its main living in the spring, here in Arizona in April and May, where it's eating all those young baby birds and baby mammals and eggs. And it can store enough fat in this tail to carry it the full year till next year if times get tough later on. There have been at least 2 observations of Gila monster attempting to dig up desert tortoise eggs, with the female desert tortoise there trying to defend the nest. And in one case, the Gila monster and the tortoise were biting at each other. It was an incredible series of photographs. And in one case, the Gila monster was successful and got an egg, and the other one it didn't. They have very sharp, doubly grooved teeth that when the Gila monster bites, venom is extruded into the grooves of the teeth, and then by capillarity flows right up into the wound. I can personally attest that the Gila monster bite is extremely painful. That was one of my most painful professional experiences. I was showing a bunch of people a Gila monster when I was working for Arizona Game and Fish many years ago, and I used to do this trick of reflexing the lower lip so I could show people the teeth. Well, you only got a couple of millimeters of leeway there, and one day it just swung around and grabbed my finger, and I was totally under its control. But it was one of the most painful experiences I've ever had. My finger felt like it was on fire, and this wave of fire kept moving up my arm. And I got nauseous. I had difficulty breathing. I had pain in my kidneys, blood in my urine. I had just a marvelous systemic reaction to the poison in this creature. But I don't think it had I not even had access to the hospital where they took me, it wouldn't have killed me, but it would have made me very sick. I probably would have crawled under a palo verde or a mesquite and just waited it out.
An important step in establishing priorities for living in and managing the Sonoran Desert is education. One of the chief allies in this effort is the Arizona Sonoran Desert Museum near Saguaro National Park West.
The mission of the Desert Museum is to try to encourage people to live in harmony with the desert. So it's an informal educational setting where you're trying to give people an understanding of what the Sonoran Desert is about and how many very interesting, beautiful things there are to it if they would just allow it to stay in its natural state as much as possible. And so as people move into this area, we hope that, of course, they visit the museum and get an understanding of deserts and what it's like to live in a desert, rather than try to eradicate things such as rattlesnakes that they fear, understand the role that those animals have in a natural ecosystem and let them remain.
Incredible plants and animals. Exceptional biodiversity. An increasing human presence. This is the Sonoran Desert. Alarms raised by invasive grasses, diseases in tortoises, and rapid urban growth motivate scientists. The U.S. Geological Survey is a partner in Sonoran Desert research. USGS biologists are studying the effects of human activities on natural systems at the request of resource management agencies like Saguaro National Park. It's a collaborative effort, leading to a much better understanding of the region as a whole, benefiting future generations of people, and perhaps most importantly, future generations of the native plants and animals that define this spectacular and beautiful place.
Some of the great things about working in the Sonoran Desert are the amazing plants and animals that you get to see. Our tortoise work has been great because we have a lot of radio tortoises that we can always find. When we go out to find where they are on a given day, we're very likely in the spring to run across a Gila monster, or a diamondback rattlesnake, a tiger rattlesnake, all the other 7 or 8 species of lizards that we might see in a single morning. And then especially on the springs following wet winters, we'll have floral displays that are unrivaled. People come from all over the world to see Sonoran Desert spring blooms following these El Nino winters.
Rather than seeing a desert, I just see a sea of green. The cacti, they have these columnar saguaros and then all sorts of other trees, palo verdes, and it's extremely lush. And there's just no way I can look at it and say that this looks like it's a barren desert.
It's a treat that's just hard to describe, and once you've been here, you don't want to leave.
One of the things that I've kind of learned over the years by being in the field so much is that the more time you spend outside, the more of those really neat things that you see. It's just a question of being out there. People say, oh, I've been in the desert for 40 years and I've never seen a tortoise or I've never seen a mountain lion. And that's because those animals are either rare or they're very elusive, and you don't see them very often. And so seeing them and experiencing those really thrilling moments in nature really comes from spending a lot of time out there during times when other people aren't out there.
I've been born and raised in the Southwest, and I feel really lucky to have the job I do. I tell people I basically get paid to be a 13-year-old boy again, running around the desert, catching snakes and lizards, and just loving it. It's a really special and unique place, and it's a place that on the outside and in reality is quite harsh. There's a lot of things that are going to poke you or can bite you or are venomous. So it's a place that when I visit, I feel like I'm visiting as somebody from the outside having a privilege to look in. So even though I live in Tucson, coming out to the desert, which is my backyard, is always a privilege, and it's always a special experience. And she is ready to go home. Thanks for your time, little tortoise.
All right. Well, I guess the plan now is to give a brief presentation of some of the follow-up work that has occurred at Saguaro National Park as a result of the initial work that we were conducting when Steve came out and filmed us. And so let's see, how do we begin with the F5? Okay. We mentioned Buffelgrass quite a lot in the film, and it's a grass that all the biologists that I know from the desert Southwest are concerned about with its vigorous growth and its rapid encroachment into the backcountry areas and the resulting fires, which can be very high temperatures and causing all the sorts of disturbances that we've highlighted in the film. And so as a result of finding this grass initially just along the roadsides while we were studying the Mother's Day fire, during the 10 years that passed after that we were studying the Mother's Day burn, we started finding it further and further away from the roadways and back in the backcountry to areas like this on this hillside where all the gold-colored grass and with the dark bases is Buffelgrass in a plot that we set up to monitor how that part was growing in comparison to all the other plots we were trying to figure out ways to manage the Buffelgrass and get rid of it for the Park Service. And so the park did ask us to come in and set up an experiment so that we could quantify the costs and the benefits of different methods of controlling Buffelgrass. And so very briefly here, we'll take a look at some of the results. That's the backcountry areas highlighted there where the arrows are, where you can see this gold color right in here, and all across here is one of our study areas. And then up on tops of these peaks, which are now several kilometers away from any roadway. And the seeds are carried by the wind and just can get everywhere in the summer winds that occur in the desert. And so, again, I was saying, there are plots all over this, and we'll visit this site again in these subsequent slides we have here. We work with a lot of volunteers to get this work done. As you'll see, it's very tough work, some of what we do to do these conduct these experiments. A lot of USGS staff, National Park Service, and folks from the University of Arizona, and then just people from the public that are very interested in helping out with the national park. We have three primary methods we are looking at, either individually or in combination. One method that has worked successfully at Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument is pulling by hand. This is at Organ Pipe down here, and you can see what we're up against when people go out to try to control Buffelgrass this way. These are bags full of it. Tons and tons have been removed from that national park area. When it gets into rocky areas, such as many of the areas in Saguaro National Park, you've got to use hand tools to get in between the rocks, and you can imagine what kind of a task that would be just from your own gardening. We used weed whackers and brush cutters to trim down the grass in an effort to have it come back vigorously without a lot of thatch, so that mostly that when we go and try to spray it, and here you can see the blue dye that was in the spray to show where we've been on our study plot, and we're hand spraying there with a backpack sprayer in the backcountry, so that when it comes back vigorously, then the chemical will do its job more efficiently. And so we had these treatments, including one where we pulled first and then sprayed, and then cut first and then sprayed. And we tested the efficiency of these different, and this pattern is just to show you that out in a patch like that, then we had these plots that were all the same in every way except that how we treated the Buffelgrass. And so again, here's the, well, we had uninfested areas were off the site because this was solid Buffelgrass inside. Then we had infested areas where we would, so these plots here, we didn't do anything to the Buffelgrass except measure it for 3 years while we conducted this experiment. And then we had all the other combinations that we worked on for the past 3 years. That's kind of what the pattern of what the plots look like on the hillside. It's a very steep slope, so there's not much of an exaggeration just to put squares on the side of that slope. And so here is a comparison of two plots where there's actually, if you zoom in, there's a string that you can see that where we put the plots on the landscape here. And I set that up, it's an odd angle just so that I could get two plots in at the same time to show you the contrast of one where we pulled and sprayed after probably 2 applications. And this is the one where we're comparing the difference in the Buffelgrass in the experimental design. This shows the percentage of change of the Buffelgrass on these plots. And in this case, it's, again, comparing if we just cut it, we didn't have much change. it would grow back vigorously right after we cut it the next time it rained. All four of these other treatments, including the pulling, the spraying, the cutting first, then spray, the pulling first, then spray, all did a pretty good job of getting rid of Buffelgrass. And then, of course, we had the control where there was no negative change in the cover of the Buffelgrass across the landscape when we put Transx out across the landscape. And this shows, this is the first, second, and third, this would be the first, second, and third treatments with the different, let's see, the first, second, and third applications of the treatments. In the same time here is the control where we didn't do anything to the Buffelgrass, didn't change that much when you compare the different times during different years. When we cut, it actually came back vigorously, more vigorously than when it was first growing on its own, at first, probably with a good rainfall. But then the others, you can see that after the first, from time 0 to the first time we cut it, when we measured, we had pretty good, we didn't have much difference between those two on any of the treatments. But by the third time we hit the Buffelgrass with a treatment, we knocked it down pretty good. And that was our goal, of course, in trying to provide the park with information about this. But you see, these bars show that there's, and how much they overlap shows that there's really not much difference between the 4 different types of spraying, of treatment. And so if you could get away with it, you'd want to just pull, for example, and not put chemicals out in the national park, which is a very high concern for the national park managers. So then ultimately then we wanted to know what was the success level and the cost and the benefits. And so this is the first treatment, the hours it took just to do this experiment on the different plots. And you can see that pulling was right up there just behind the addition of basically the sum of pulling and spraying were the two most costly with respect to the hours. The equipment didn't add up to much at all. And so when you come down to it, with your success level, they were all good at getting rid of Buffelgrass, except for the cutting alone, which was not very good at all. But then if you see the dollar values of which all the national parks have to consider with everything that they do, we're looking at 2 orders of magnitude more cost when we're going to go out there with personnel and try to pull this material. These costs are based on entry-level folks, technicians that would come in and help us work on these types of activities. And so the answer for the park was that if you have to consider the cost, then you would probably go with the spraying of this material if you knew that it would be safe in every other way. And today we won't go into the details of that unless there are questions about what the effect might be on the other vegetation like the ocotillos and the choyas and the saguaros as well. So what next would be, first of all, we have to disseminate this information. All along the way, we've been reporting to the National Park Service and providing them with the information they could put into the reports and have serious discussions about do we want to use the chemicals in the park or not, which was the original reason that they asked us to come in. Share this with other folks in the scientific community that are trying to solve problems with invasive plants, and also share it with the public so that they understand what's going on our public lands. They've already implemented a Buffelgrass control program at Sonoran National Park. Then we need to monitor the progress that we make and make sure that we haven't made a worse problem somehow by the activities that are going on out there. So evaluate the effectiveness of the activities out there. And then potentially go back in, and if these look very naked after you remove all the Buffelgrass. And so the question is, are we losing soils by this the surface disturbance that we're creating, and are there other follow-up management needs that need to be addressed? And finally, the reason we all go out there in the first place, or got interested in this in the beginning, was for taking advantage of unexpected opportunities such as this coral snake, which on the very last day of our last time to get to make measurements on this round of this experiment, this coral snake was found underneath one of our measuring devices, and it popped out. And so for 25 years, I've been stomping around in the desert, and I'd never seen a coral snake. So that was a very good day for all of us. It wasn't even on the list of things that we were excited that we might potentially see that day. And so that's another one of the venomous snakes that we deal with in the desert Southwest. And so everybody got to look at that, and that's got us out there to see those things. And I guess Cecil will talk about some of the other opportunities.
Maybe. That didn't work. Okay, I wanted to take you some places that we really didn't go in the video, but to talk about something that's become my mantra, just the benefits of being there. Todd just finished up with describing seeing a coral snake, which is really a wonderful thing to see when you're out in the Sonoran Desert, but it actually has some very specific, real values to future research projects just from being there. And we started our work out there in 1994, as Todd mentioned, and at the Mother's Day fire. This was Mother's Day 1994, and we went out to study the effects of fire on the saguaro cactus and desert tortoises primarily. But while we were on this study, this is 11 years ago, this is a patch of Buffelgrass, which Todd has shown you. We didn't know there was a problem infestation on the park at that time, but because we were there looking at a fire that was carried at that time by an invasive annual grass, red brome, we found this at one of the major picnic sites, and that kind of triggered this next series of research. And again, had we not been there looking at one thing, we would have missed that. And also, at that same first surveying for tortoises that were cooked in the Mother's Day fire, we stumbled upon a waterway, and we found lowland leopard frogs there. The park didn't even know that they had that species in those drainages. And that's turned into now 11 years of monitoring a species that's in trouble in Arizona. And we've learned a lot about it. And almost ironically, we found that some of the problems of the frog are related to some of this other work on fire. I'm sure everyone in this audience has heard about the global decline in amphibians. Well, it's true, and there's no single cause. There's no smoking gun that's going to explain it all, but there are three main causes worldwide, and the first, of course, is habitat loss and degradation. In the arid southwest in Arizona, where we do most of our work, of course, wetlands, which are necessary for amphibians, were always the places where human settlers came. When Western man came and settled, it was the rivers and the creeks and the springs that if they exploited, well, we've kind of displaced some of the native amphibians that way. And now the introduction of exotic species. And when I give a talk just on amphibian declines, I'm mainly talking about introduced aquatic predators. Things like in Arizona, like the American bullfrog, crayfish, mosquito fish. All of these are non-native aquatic predators that are devastating to our native leopard frogs and tarahumara frogs. And recently, disease has reared its head as a serious problem now affecting some of these populations. By habitat loss and degradation, we're talking about like a 90% decline in the original area of those habitats. So when you've got disease now hitting a species that's range has been reduced by 90%, you've got a crisis situation. And recently, some papers have clearly shown that global climate change, the global warming that we're experiencing, are causing some of the species in Central America, Costa Rica in particular. There have been as many as 20 amphibian species, and now even the snake species that feed on those amphibians that are declining because of the warming and drying cycles now are different than they've been in the past. But those are just a very quick summary of the causes. To talk now a little more about how our research on fire and invasive grasses and frogs is for some very interesting results they've shown up at Saguaro National Park. This is one of the pools where the lowland leopard frog occurred in the area where we were studying the Mother's Day fire. The Mother's Day fire was just a medium fire. It wasn't high intensity and didn't cause a lot of runoff of ash and sediments. And so this is a shot that was taken probably about 1996. There was another fire, the Box Canyon fire in 1999. Whoops. I don't know. We've got some interesting switches here. I'll go back to, well, we'll talk about we'll talk about this in just a minute because it's out of place. This is that same pond that we just looked at, and look at the ash. This is the Box Canyon fire, and the ash came down, and that, of course, had a deleterious effect on tadpoles and fishes in streams. But in the ensuing couple of years, then this is that area. Further floods post-fire now have totally filled in those ponds that supported the frogs. And to show you again, this is another pond along that same stream. This is the way it was when it was holding frogs. This is the way it is now. For any of you interested that want to come to Tucson this weekend, they're actually having some volunteers at the park. They're going to go in and dig the sediment out of those pools to see experimentally if that will bring the frogs back quicker. Otherwise, we have to wait for Mother Nature to do it, and we don't know how long it will be before we get a scouring flood there. But the javelina picture was supposed to come in right here because when we were doing some USGS Water Resources Division came out and is doing some water quality monitoring along this area, and we were just going up, and in this particular place, which used to hold frogs, the javelina was there digging, because these are big concave pits. They're tinajas. They're big. Before they had the sediment in there, they contained water. Well, the water was still in there, and I'm going to back up just so you can see that javelina. This javelina has dug down about a foot, and there's actually a little pool of water right below his nose. This is the first time this has been reported. You've all seen pictures of elephants digging down in some of the rivers in Africa to get at water in times of drought. We didn't know that our little desert piggy, the javelina, does the same thing. Very interesting to us. But just one data slide to show you what's the effect of fires. And this is totally surprising to us. And this is Don Swan, the biologist at Sonoran National Park that did most of this recently. The blue represents the areas where pools where we found frogs in areas that burned, and then the yellow is the unburned areas. Now these are just number of frogs, adult and juvenile frogs seen. This is the spring of '96, and this is fall of 2003. So you'll notice that in both those areas that subsequently burned or didn't burn, we were seeing frogs up until about 2000. Remember I said the Box Canyon fire was 1999. Well, that was a more severe fire and caused the subsequent erosion and filling up with sediments. And so soon after that, every year, we saw fewer and fewer frogs. We have not seen any frogs now in that canyon, in that area, since 2002. This is one reason we're concerned about digging some of those pools out to see if we can get that back into kilter. And the park has also created a program to use neighbors of the park to provide drought refugia for these frogs by putting in backyard ponds and using native fishes for mosquito control because of West Nile virus, and then putting in some of these native frogs from the park, hoping they will be there and then move on to the park. And this is one of the houses they just dug last month, and this is Don Swan over there. You saw him in the video. Don's one of my former graduate students, and he's a resource manager at Sonoran National Park now, and he's a key player in all the research and management that's going on there. And basically, Don has gotten all these neighbors motivated, and there are 4 ponds now that are being in. And actually, this is a picture of the pond in my backyard, and I live just a half mile from the park. That's a coyote pup last year that was coming in and just resting in the spike rush. Last month, we actually moved tadpoles of the lowland leopard frog into my pond. The plan is to mark those frogs and show that on their own, they will move the approximately 2 miles back to those streams that you saw that were full of sediment. So we got to get those emptied out to see if they will do that. So this has kind of become a hobby, a research project in trying to do something for the park. Okay, well, we promised you briefly to talk about Gila monsters. You've already seen that I've been professionally embarrassed by one of these. I'm probably the only professional herpetologist that has admitted being stupid enough to get bitten by one. But the Gila monster is one of only 2 venomous lizards in the entire world, the other being the Mexican beaded lizard. And this is a great creature of the Sonoran Desert. And recently, some research has shown that fractions of the venom are playing some important medical roles. That's just to show you the relative size. People don't understand how large Gila monsters are, but this is an adult banded gecko on top, and this is a hatchling Gila monster, as small as they ever are. Some people confuse these. They think that these geckos are young Gila monsters, and they clearly aren't. This is a typical adult Gila monster, approximately 20 inches long. So it's quite a large lizard, and it's got these incredibly sharp teeth, as we mentioned in the video. But recent research has shown that some of these peptides, these small chains of amino acids that occur in Gila monster venom, are going to become an important treatment for diabetes type 2. That's adult onset diabetes. And some of the research shows that if they get the exendin is the name of the chemical that it's in the Gila monster venom itself. The exenatide is the synthesized version that they're going to be marketing. And if you inject these into, well, they did it first with rats, but now they've done it with humans, and that this molecule lowers and stabilizes the blood glucose in the people and also raises their insulin levels much more strongly than the other human hormones and peptides that they use. So this is, it's actually the Food and Drug Administration is supposed to make a decision this month on whether they can start marketing it. But it's really very exciting. And this is not work now that USGS is doing, but this is incredibly relevant research, and it just drives home the point how important some of these different biomes are. And this medical research alone is probably going to allow Saguaro National Park to get funding to study the ecology of the Gila monster, because they want to make sure that it's doing well for potential future medical benefit. So we're the people that will come in now and put radios in the Gila monsters and do the field research. But this is all very important stuff, and it's all interrelated. And also, they've got another one of the peptides in Gila monster venom. They're using it to try and reduce the effects of memory loss with Alzheimer's and other diseases as such. And I can attest that this absolutely has to work, because as I mentioned, I got bit 15 years ago by Gila monster, and I remember every detail of that to this day. And politically, we're in the news. This is an editorial that occurred in the Daily Star last week. We'd already set this talk up months ago, and Dave Fitzsimmons he thought in the news, Gila monster spit. And I won't read through this to you, but it was just a great kind of a summary of the history of this research and a humorous look at the effects politically and economically it might have. My favorite is here. It's official. Gila monster spit is the state saliva. So that's our official state saliva now. Anyway, that's a quick look at kind of what's come about from this research that we started 11 years ago that's totally unrelated, we thought. With that, we'll take questions. Yes.
How this weed controlled in Africa? Is it as bad in Africa as it is here?
You want to take that one, Todd?
As with many plants that are a problem when they become invasive on another continent, over in Africa, there are, it's in the system where it evolved, and so I haven't seen it over there, and I haven't. There's not a lot of work on its distribution over there. Actually, when you look up the literature, there's very little about the ecology so far of Buffelgrass, but in most cases, you don't see it becoming dominant in the landscape in the places where it's native, just like the red brome grass or the cheatgrass we have in the Great Basin. When you read about where over in the Mediterranean areas around the Mediterranean Sea, in those areas, it's not a dominant like it is over in this system. So that's likely the situation over there.
How's it controlled over there? Is it a bug or what?
It's probably, you've got large herbivores, a lot of large herbivores over there, and it may be that some of it's kept in check that way, and also just, we're learning more and more about, soil microbes and interactions that occur there. There could also be interactions going on at many different levels, anywhere from the soil up to the large herbivores.
That red brome grass that you mentioned that was there before, and that was where the fire began, and the red brome grass, is that a native? Does that need to be controlled as well?
Well, red brome is also a foreign grass. It evolved in the Mediterranean area, and it was been introduced into the Southwest for many decades, but we didn't start seeing problems with it until it started building up following the very wet years in the 70s and 80s. And it became this massive ground cover, and it started carrying fires. It was that grass that was carrying the fire in the Mother's Day fire. But now we've come into this drought, and we've learned that 2 successive years of drought knocks red brome back, because it's an annual grass and apparently has almost an annual seed bank. So this 2 successive dry years works against it. The buffelgrass, being perennial, just hunkers back in dry times and bides its time. So it's potentially a much more serious problem.
One other question. You talk about spraying. Was that hand sprayed, with tanks, or was that aerial spray?
In this case, those were backpack sprayers that carried maybe 1.5 gallons at a time, or 2 gallons. Yeah. And so that in itself, you want to be as efficient as you can, because walking in several kilometers to a site like that with that on your back becomes a burden at some point.
But yeah, with aerial spraying, of course, would spray everything.
That's right. And you could be much more specific, especially in a place like a national park. And
right.
So far, we don't. The buffelgrass in the U.S. has not, in this part of the U.S., has not reached the extent that it has in some other places, like the cheatgrass and the red brome, where it just covers entire valleys and very much dominates the system. So far, the buffalo has not done that, so you can go in and be strategic and use backpack sprayers so far.
If we ever got to the point where we had to use aerial application, the Sonoran Desert would be toast. It's just, we've got to deal with it before that. And so far, we've worked well. Also, there's some problems with some of the chemicals that we're using. This particular chemical has an adverse effect on amphibians. And so, basically, we don't think that will ever be a problem in trying to control it in the deserts, because we're applying it directly with these sprayers on the offending plants. And the half-life of the glyphosate is not that long. It'll break down quickly. And right now, though, it's a good time for us to make hay with getting rid of buffelgrass before we get frogs back in some of those drainages near the buffelgrass. So now it's a really good time to push that and try and go ahead, while they're digging out the holes and hoping we get a flood to scour the sediment out, to go ahead and get rid of the buffelgrass and the fountain grass at the same time.
Any other questions for Cecil or Todd? All right, Marge.
You mentioned that you marked the frogs before you transplanted them. How did you mark a frog?
Well, it depends on the size of the frog. If they're large enough, we'll put a pit tag in them, which is just a microchip. It's the same thing you put in your dogs and horses and in fish. But also, we have, on some behavioral studies, we're actually putting little belts on them with the elastic that you use in panties and in lingerie. But that really looks great on my federal requisition.
How long did it take those guys to make those marvelous pictures? Over a year? To catch those mates and all?
The video.
Oh, the video. The video was actually done in just over a year.
Yeah.
An active field season. But some of the photographs, the still photographs, were inserted, and some of those went back to the 80s, I think.
But
so we've been out there since, I've been here since '73, and Todd's been here a decade later, in the 80s. So it's been but the video itself was just shot in 1 year. Did he come back the second year to finish it?
I know, but it's only a cumulative of about probably 5 field days.
Yes.
Very, very efficient, and that's what's great about working with Steve is he was extremely efficient with the time that he spent with us, so that it didn't detract from the work that we did, and he came off with some very, very nice, informative footage. So.
How come I never get to see this stuff?
Actually, Steve Wessels is on the staff of the USGS in Las Vegas, and in this series we've shown several of his other films. You may have seen we did one on sea otters, Precipice of Survival, and another one on Delta Revival, the California, San Francisco Bay Estuary and Sacramento and San Joaquin River deltas. And I forget it. We've shown several of Steve's film throughout this series of public lectures over the years.
Are those available in the library?
Yes, I think so. Or we can get them to you. Are there any more questions this afternoon for Cecil or Todd? Well, thank you for coming and joining us, and thank you very much, Cecil Schwalbe and Todd Eskew. Thank you. It was delightful.
Thanks for having us.
One other dumb question.
Oh, hey.